He brought me to the east gate, and behold, the glory of the God of Israel came from the east. And his voice was like the noise of many waters, and the earth did shine with his glory. And the glory of Yahweh came into the temple through the east gate. And the glory of Yahweh did fill the house. And I heard him speaking to me out of the house. And he said to me, Son of man, the place of my throne, the place of the soles of my feet, where I will dwell in the midst of the children of Israel, forever in the place of my holy name. Now show them the temple to the house of Israel. Show them the design of the temple and measure the pattern. Show them the form and the seat of the house and the fashion and the comings and goings. This is the Torah of the house. Upon the top of the mountain, the whole limit thereof round about shall be holy. Behold, this is the law of the house. The king's palace. There you see it. We're looking at Ezekiel's temple, and there's a building that is west of the temple, and we're calling it the king's palace. In the rendering of the video, you can see he has the dimensions slightly different. We're going to go into those dimensions. We're going to research this and compare this to previous buildings and temples and structures, specifically the outline and pattern that David got. So here we're looking at the temple facing in the eastward direction. And then behind it to the west is another building that's been a mystery. Okay, we're calling it the King's Palace. We're announcing it. This is the King's House, the King's Palace. Here's some of the dimensions they have. It's a little bit challenging to understand these dimensions because some of them are the structure of the building, some of them are the wall, but we're going to go over the detail of this great mystery. Very, very exciting times. What is the King's Palace? What is the King's House? Quick history lesson. We have to go back to the time that David is taking over Jerusalem. When he does, there's a Jebusite city there. He takes over the city. He takes over a citadel and a fortress. And then he rebuilds that, and he calls it King David's Palace or King David's House, okay? So he does that. We know where that is. There's the proof in archaeology in the city of David actually shows us where that is. So David gets the pattern, the architectural drawings, many of which we're going to go over in this video as it relates to the Ezekiel temple. But then what happens is David's palace is built. Then Solomon builds the temple. When Solomon builds the temple, Solomon also builds a palace. So you have two king's houses, two king's palace. So the palace in David's becomes a like administrative building or a place to hold treasures and things, okay? And then you have Solomon. So the rest of the kings of Judah, they lived in Solomon's palace, okay? Now, why is that important? Because some reason, once we get to the millennium, we get the reign of Christ, okay, this details of this palace, this house, is not clearly defined. In fact, it only gives us the dimensions of the building and no other details of the structure itself. However, if we compare Scripture with Scripture, if we compare this to the porch of the pillars, the architectural drawing that David built, if we compare this to the book of Esther, that some of you have seen these hangings. We talked about the veil, the hangings. Well, there's a courtyard around this building. There's a space around this building, uncovered space around the building. One side you have the wall, one side you have the building, okay? So in order for us to come to terms with what this building is, we can not only get the architectural layout given to us by Ezekiel because he doesn't provide the details of what it is. For example, we don't have necessarily the full height of it. We can compare it to something else, and we get a height that's probably similar to the temple, maybe 50 cubits, okay, approximate. But we are not told much about this house. However, we believe that the scrolls, we have other scrolls other pieces of information. We have the scroll of Ezekiel. We can read the book of Ezekiel. But we need the scroll of the Megillah, the scroll of Esther. And once we look at the book of Esther, we find some extraordinary details that tell us exactly what this building is and its purpose and function. Now, in order to understand this, let's go right into the notes. Now, what are we looking at here? Here is our layout of the inner court. In the center would be the altar. And let's remember that we saw the structure of the living creatures as they form a pattern, and then the throne is in the center. And then there are wheels within wheels, okay? So we saw that structure and the pattern of that forming the gates of the temple. So in the temple, what we're doing is we're facing east. This is the east direction. This is south, and this is north. And then this is the temple area. This is the courtyard. It has a space around it called the separating space. And then behind it is another space, okay? So you can see the distance of this area here, this inner court, that's 100 cubits. This distance here to here is another 100 cubits. Then we have another space, which is here, and this is another 100 cubit space with the building inside of it. That's 70 cubits. So in red here, this is 70 cubits, and then there's a space in between, and then there's a wall, and that is what we're going to discuss in this video. So let's remember, all this is his pattern, and our instructions is to show the people, show them the pattern, show them the design. So here's our notes, and let's do some word study. The king's palace in the millennium, the temple complex. Now, in order to kind of understand how we come to terms with some of these interpretations and things that we're showing you, it takes a lot of study, a lot of word study. Unfortunately, we do not read the original languages of Greek and Hebrew, and so we're at a loss as to some of the intricacies of what the Holy Spirit is trying to show us. So, in order to change that, we must look at the original words. For example, in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 41, verse 12, it has this structure, building. Most of your translations will say building or structure. Now, in the Hebrew, that word is binyan, okay? Beit, nun, yod, nun, binyan, okay? Now, what you can see here is there's in Hebrew, you have a root word, okay? And so you got this beit nun, and this is forming a root. And the root word there is binah, and that is to build. So normally when you see the word build in the Old Testament, it's our root word for this building or structure. Now this word is unique to just the book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel is the only one that uses this word. And he uses another word, binyah, beit nun yod he, okay, binyah as well, which also means a structure or a building. So he uses these words, okay? He doesn't use house or, another word. He uses this word, which is a unique word. So we must investigate this word. Now we find similar words to this, okay, with a beit yod tav nun, okay, and that's bithyaun. And this word is a palace. So I began to realize when I was looking at these words that Ezekiel is using, they're closely resembling the word palace, a large house, which you find in Esther, chapter 1, verse 5, and also several places in the book of Esther. So again, we have these similar letters, okay, in root words, and we also find it here in the word pattern. In our series, we've been telling you about show them the pattern. Well, that word pattern has this root word inside it, which you can see. Beit Nun Ya. Okay, our same root word that we've been showing you. But it's got a tav in front. So it's batayeth. Okay, means a pattern or a plan or a form. Okay. We also have the word with a mem. Beit Nun Hey. Okay. Mibneh. Okay, and that means frame. So these are unique words that Ezekiel is using, but we can find the root word closely lining up with the word palace. So that's why we believe this word building is not just a building, it is a palace. Not any palace, but the king's palace, because it's in his millennial temple. So what does Ezekiel tell us? Ezekiel 41, verse 12, the building is west of the separate place was 70 cubits. That's what we showed you before. And we'll show you again as we go through the measurements. Okay, so the building, you can see here, 70 cubits. And that is the binyan. Okay, the structure of the building. And then we have a wall. And the wall was 5 cubits thick. And that's the length of it. Now, what we want to make clear is that's the inside of the wall. So it's 5 cubits thick and it's 90 cubits long. So what that means is if you're on the, so this is the building, and then this is the wall. Now the wall is 5 cubits thick, but if you're inside and if you're in this area here, that length is 90 cubits from here to here. You can see it right there, 90 cubits. Then what it says is it's it doesn't say outside, but then it says it's 100 cubits. So that's the outside, because the thickness here, you have 5 cubits here, 5 cubits here, giving you a total of 10 cubits. Okay, so that's why the distance inside the wall is 90, the distance outside the wall is 100. So what we have is a clear description of 70 cubits as the structure of the building, of the palace, okay? And then we have the courtyard. So, the courtyard we can tell you quite a bit about as we go here. But let's continue our measurements and we'll show you the rest of what it says. The building with galleries, okay? In the wall of 100 cubits. So that's the outside of the wall, was the 100 cubits we saw, okay? But this word galleries is really important for us. Now the building height is double the height of the dining halls. Now there's dining halls and they have 3 stories to them. Okay? So those 3 stories, however high, it doesn't say specifically how high they are, but there's also 3 stories in the temple. So it's quite possible it's that height as the temple, or a significant height. Most renderings, if you look at this up online of this west building, most people call it the west building, they won't have much height. They seem to lose sight of the height is double the dining halls. But let's look at this galleries. So Ezekiel 41:15 talks about these galleries. Now what the gallery is, it's an offset of the building of several walks, and walks with pillars. Okay, pillars. Now we're getting somewhere. So we have a space between the building and the wall. Okay, and there's pillars. Now you can see we've already drawn the pillars here. But what this is telling us about is something that David had the drawings for and Solomon built. Okay, it's right here. And it's something called, it's got a couple names, Porch of the Pillars and the Forest of the Cedar of Lebanon. And it's this right here. Now it tells us specifically that this has rows of 15 pillars. and look at the length, 100 cubits. So this is the same length as what we saw. And remember, there's, a courtyard around it of pillars. So I began to realize that this 100 cubits in the porch of the pillars, this is what is around the king's house. Okay? Now, we're going to talk about it later, but there's another space, and then there's a throne. So the other thing is that this more than likely houses a throne. Now back to our notes, and what did we learn? We learned about something called the pattern of the porch of the pillars. So when David is instructing Solomon to build the temple, he uses this word, which we saw before, pattern, betyath. Okay, I'm probably saying that wrong, but anyway, you can see that is the pattern of the porch of the pillars. And so we looked at that structure, and there was a lot of details on it, but what we could see is it had 45 pillars and 15 pillars in a row, and the length was 100 cubits. So simply what we did is in our drawing, we've applied the pillars to a row of 15. So here you have a row of 15, row of 15, row of 15, and then of course at the bottom, giving us a total of 45. Now we're not saying that these are the only pillars here, but we're detailing those because that was what we saw before. But we had the same length, okay, of our space, which is 100 cubits. So we have the same 100 cubits. We have clearly a courtyard area with pillars, so we're applying those pillars. But more than likely what we have is we have pillars in an archway going to both sides, so that these pillars would then connect to a kind of porch or to the structure of the building somehow. So this would all be a courtyard area, okay? And there's not only pillars on the outside, but there's pillars on both sides. Now, there's other details about the place that Solomon builds that are important details for us, really important instructions. So he builds this porch of the pillars, and it's an armory, okay? In fact, the word in Hebrew for palace often, or castle, is armon. And that's where we get our word in English, armory. Okay? So this is the millennium. In the millennium, you don't need weapons. Okay? So it's not an armory. It's not going to hold shields and stuff like that. It's the king's palace. Okay? So there's a porch, and we showed you the space before that had a throne. So what we believe is that within that building or structure, there's some type of judgment hall. There's some type of judgment seat, okay? Some type of throne. And the other thing is it says is that within this, it also is the name, the house of the forest of Lebanon, there are drinking vessels of wine made of gold. So Solomon stored those vessels in this building. Now, why is this important? Well, because we see the same thing in Esther. In Esther chapter 1, verse 5, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. Remember, this word is very similar to the building in Ezekiel's temple. Where there were white, green, blue hangings or banners. You guys wonder why I have all these banners and hangings in this room? Okay. I'm studying this stuff. And they're fastened with cords of fine linen and red, purple colors to silver. So remember we saw the crimson, the garment that they put on Christ? Well, he was placed in a judgment hall. He was placed on a bema seat. because he's going to actually have that. They're in the temple. And so Satan was mocking him, but he's going to reign, and Satan's going to be incarcerated 1,000 years, and this is all going to happen. This is all going to be built. Okay? So you got hangings, just like in Moses' tabernacle, hangings of purple, and pillars. So this is talking about a court in the garden of the king's palace with pillars of marble. And Song of Solomon 2, for his banner over me was love. These are the hangings, guys. They're in that space. Some people have seen them. And then verse 7, and they gave them drink in vessels of gold, royal wine in abundance according to the decree of the king. So just like before, where we saw the drinking vessels in the forest of Lebanon, they're also in this space. And Esther gives us this information. This also, we believe, is what Christ said, I will not drink this wine again until I drink it with you in the kingdom. We believe that this is the feast he's talking about. That's being shown to us as a wine feast in Esther chapter 1. But Esther chapter 5 and elsewhere tells us more about this place. So Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court. Okay? So Esther comes in. She stands in the inner court. Now the inner court could be this space here. It could also be this space here. This is also called the inner court. All right? But the book of Esther is clearly giving us an indication that Esther is approaching the king with great concern and reverence, because she's not supposed to visit. She could lose her life. So she fasted 3 days. She enters in a manner by which the king can see her. So he's somewhere sitting on a throne, and he sees her. And he allows her to come in. She touches his scepter. Okay, and he asks, what is it that you want? So what happened is the king is in the king's house. He's in the house, and she comes into the inner court. That's this area here. And she comes into the inner court of the king's house. And the king sat on his royal throne. So that's why we believe the book of Esther is giving us vivid details of what is going on in this structure. It's the royal house next to the gate of the house. Okay? And so that's Esther chapter 5, verse 7. The king arose from the feast of wine and went into the palace garden. Okay? So clearly Esther is showing us about this palace. Now you can see as our notes continue what it says. The sheep palace. Well, what is that? Again, we need word studies. And if we go to John chapter 10, read the whole parable. We don't have time to read the whole thing. But it's in English it says sheepfold. Okay? But if you look at the Greek, sheepfold is two words. One is the normal word for sheep. The other one is aule, which means palace. So John chapter 10 is talking about a sheep palace. And this is what the Strong's Concordance says. It says this palace or this space or this courtyard, it says it's an uncovered space around the house, enclosed by a wall in which the sheep were gathered at night. It's an uncovered courtyard. It was also, the word is also used to describe the courts of the tabernacle and the temple. Bang. Here it is. So picture, if you will, this is a person's house. This is their house, and they bring in the sheep. The sheep come in. They're enclosed in a wall, and there's a courtyard. There's a courtyard area, and then the sheep were brought in. So this is the sheep's palace as well. So not only is it the king's house, and that's why we call it the king's palace, it's the palace of the sheepfold, or the palace of the sheep, is what it says in John chapter 10. Isn't that amazing? Now, if we look again at the details of this wall, we can see the wall was 5 cubits thick, and this represents the 5 wise virgins. The outside length of the wall was 100 cubits. Okay? The inside length of the wall is 90 cubits. Now that's just one wall, so if we multiply that by all four walls, we have 100 times 4, 400. 90 times 4 is 360. This is the number of days a year, 360 days a year. 400 times 360 is 144,000. That's who's going into the sheepfold. All right? Now, we also have a word for the palace at Shushan. And the palace is Binra. And it also is similar to the words that we saw before. Okay, so this, whenever you see the palace at Shushan, that's what it's talking about, this building. Okay, and Ezekiel seems to tell us that the word is also used to go around the wall. So it can mean a wall. It can also mean a building or a structure. So isn't that amazing? It's like architecture and archaeology coming together to show us we can find something in the future that's going to be built called the King's Palace. I'm so excited about this, guys. I have way more information than I'm sharing in this video. I'll have to do another part to it to show more evidence and support of what this is. But by a simple word study, we can see there that the root words of the words that Ezekiel is using are closely tied with the words to build and also the words for palace. In addition to that, we compare what the space is and with the forest of the cedars of Lebanon, also called the porch of the pillars, and in it we can see 100 cubits. We can see rows of pillars, and we could see that the galleries showed us that there were pillars around that courtyard area. Okay, so all this was in our notes. We went through quickly. But what we're seeing is that the information Ezekiel does give us is mostly the courtyard area. We get the dimensions of the wall. We get the courtyard area. We get the galleries. Okay, and we get the book of Esther. We read the book of Esther. In addition to that, Song of Solomon, chapter 3, verse 7 through 10. Also talks about this space and the banners and the pillars and everything. So we're certain that's what this is, okay? However, there's more to the story, of course, because, there's no new thing under the sun, and we have other information to support this, but this is part of our research, our investigation, to show them the pattern, show them the design, show them the structure. Okay, in order to do that, we must compare other areas. For example, the courtyard area, that's 100 cubits. That's the tabernacle. It had a courtyard around it. Okay, Moses was shown the pattern. Okay, Ezekiel was shown the pattern. Some of those patterns, the story lends itself to showing us something else, showing us something in the future, something that we haven't seen yet. Okay. It's going to happen. It's going to be in the future. It's going to happen. But the door is already open, okay? And he's allowed for the knowledge and revelation to be understood in these last days that have stumped theologians for centuries. In Ezekiel's temple, what is the west building? It is the King's Palace. So, guys, this is part of our playlist. As well, I encourage you to go over the forest of the cedars of Lebanon, or the porch of the pillars. We got a whole other video on that. I think that would be really good for you to watch, how the Most High has led me to places and spaces like this one that actually show the architecture of some of the temple buildings. Okay, so I'll have links to that, and this is part of our playlist. We'll have our notes as well in the description field, and the other videos. I can't emphasize enough, guys, please watch these in succession. If you have missed other videos along the way into the Holy of Holies, the colors, the veil, the other messages that have led to this one is a progressive message, okay? And it's continuing. We have more to cover. So, guys, as we say in each video, I don't know if you can see it here, it says, fear God, Give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come. Worship him that made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the fountains of waters. Amen.